know that it's just a matter of time before they quickly find excuses to focus that kind of surveillance on and not on violent crime, but on political dissidents, folks that are speaking truth to power in ways that people in power can find uncomfortable, to say the least. And so that's something that we got a taste of what that can look like very, very explicitly or in the administration at the federal level of the last 4 years, but that unquestionably has been going on at a local and state level pretty persistently. So any tool that they have, it's just a matter of time before they're using it. Thankfully, we've been able to push back on that. We've been involved in working with the West Wednesday Coalition, led by the incredible Tawana Jones and folks from that broader coalition on efforts to push back on gag orders that the police department was putting on victims of police brutality. So we had protests, we pushed for legislation at a city level. We also hit the courts, and through all those combined efforts, we're successful to get rid of gag orders and to make sure that those who were punished for it, for speaking out to defend themselves after their names were smeared, actually got restitution and then some back. We've also been involved in the campaign for justice, safety, and jobs in Baltimore City, which is a coalition of folks that came about right after Freddie Gray's murder and the uprising, focused on, as the name says, initially around justice, safety, and jobs. Over time, the focus has been particularly around, well, we think that all three are linked, obviously, but particularly around issues of justice and safety, and knowing that what that means is taking the police department head on. And so figuring out what could be done to make sure that there's as much oversight and accountability of the police department in our city as possible, and how at a state level we can be working on supporting efforts for police accountability. This session, and Kaylin will be taking a lot more detail, the coalition's two priorities have been around repealing the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, which is a law that was put in place in the 70s as a direct offensive response to the civil rights movement, and hence why it has that Orwellian name that makes cops be above the law. And also restoring local control to the Baltimore City Police Department. Baltimore City Police has not had local control since the Civil War, when those running City Hall were just convinced that there was an incredible amount of Confederate support within the police department. Obviously, to some extent, some of those trends still continue, but if we don't have direct oversight over them, it makes it much harder to hold them accountable. And so that's one of the efforts that we're taking on this session. So with that, I feel like I'm already starting to kind of segue into just like the broad work that we're doing, but on policy, but just want to see if folks have any questions on our organizing efforts or just the broader organization before Kaylin takes it away.
Well, I guess my first question would be, you mentioned, how do you assist organizations in organizing and partnering with other organizations so that we can build strength, and present a unified front around issues that we all feel similar about? Right.
So it's been mostly through joining coalitions. So that's why I'm kind of dropping like the places where we're active. And so, definitely if I'm happy to talk a bit more about the campaign for justice, safety, and jobs to see if that's something that y'all would be interested in participating in as well. But also we just welcome when folks reach out to us as well. What that support can look like is from helping to provide like material support, like if it's something that's aligned with our strategic priorities, our local policy work, our state policy work, and there's a grassroots interest in it as well, figuring out how we can support with literally like folks need help with banners and that kind of stuff, particularly potentially helping out with participating in those types of actions as well. Our policy team and our legal team have an intake process as well, where we can share with them what is happening in communities where local leaders are taking up different struggles, and they can look at what kind of policies they're aiming to take on to provide feedback, see if maybe they already have an example of a counterpart that's worked elsewhere, or some of the limitations to keep in mind, just like as additional research in figuring out that kind of policy advocacy approach, to yeah, potential support around, guidance with media contacts, that kind of stuff. It all really depends on just how much we're actively working together. But we basically, do our best and to provide due diligence and respond to requests.
And with an organization, is there like an appointed person that kind of liaisons with, like, from an organization that works directly with the ACLU and then brings that information back to the organization, or how does that work? How are the connections, the communication?
Yeah, so if you take like our work within the Campaign for Justice, Safety, and Jobs, we have different orgs participating in there. We've got folks from um, Baltimore Block, or sorry, now Organizing Black, GASA, Jews United for Justice, Out for Justice, um, Power Inside, and the Citizens Policing Project, and several other orgs that where we meet up and we have representatives who participate in weekly
Okay.
calls. And so in those, or bi-weekly calls at this point. But in those bi-weekly calls, we all just share, here's what our different orgs are up to, and here's where, as a coalition, we've agreed we want to focus on. And so, as I mentioned, in this case, it's around Leobor repeal and restoring local control to the Baltimore Police Department. And so we would each kind of have representatives within that kind of or coalition decision-making space to help shape that strategy and to report back and forth.
Okay, fantastic. Did anyone else have some questions for Mr. Ismail?
Yeah, yes. Um, could you give me a little bit of background of how the ACLU was founded? And it's a two-part question, and the other part of the question is, how is the organization funded? Who are the people behind their funding and stuff like that?
Two great questions. I'll turn it to Kaylin too if there's anything that I'm missing, because I'm sure there will be. Because for starters, as I mentioned, this is a 100-year-old org. I've been in the ACLU and our affiliate for just a little over 3 years, and so we all kind of take different narratives on how it comes about. But at the fundamentals, the ACLU was started back in 1920, by labor lawyers. Folks who have been actively working to push back against government oppression of wildcat strikers, folks that were actively involved in organizations like the Industrial Workers of the World, folks who were involved to some extent in also the fight for LGBT rights, and unquestionably also around racial discrimination and oppression. In Maryland, our chapter was actually started up in response to a lynching in the Eastern Shore, and that was trying to be seen as legal. And so lawyers came together and started the affiliate to push back and say that not only is that grossly inhumane and evil, it's also unconstitutional, and you hide behind that laws and that kind of effort so as to continue racism. And so that's been the kind of the broad origin through that. The organization, because it's 100 years old, has gone through different periods. Started with a lot more of a more intentional radical mindset, and it kind of culminated to some extent in the 60s, getting involved with supporting anti-war civil rights efforts, supporting lawsuits to protect activists. Then continue that while also taking a more litigative approach during like the 70s to like 90s type of range, where basically and focused a lot more broadly on ensuring that the Constitution was applied equally to everyone, and so everyone. And so sometimes we also, for good reason, get a bad rap, because there were periods where some different affiliates would make sure that we went that way. Yes, Charlie. By defending folks like explicit white supremacists, and saying that there was a response, there's a need for everyone to speak freely in order to make sure that everyone is free. That has evolved over time, particularly over the last decade, where we're as the organization has become a lot more diverse, as we've been a lot more intentional about race equity within our work, within how we approach policy efforts, we've started to recognize that defending the First Amendment isn't about defending the First Amendment. Like, the First Amendment is absolutely crucial and has to be protected. But the reason why is because it's a way to protect people's humanity. And if we go out of our way to provide space for folks that are actively trying to undermine and promote, explicit, racism, just the most horrible seeds of this country, and try to say that we have to protect that, we just don't see it as a priority anymore, and we think it's actually pretty dangerous. So we try to make sure, such as in the case of the gag order approach that we took in Baltimore, that when we're taking on First Amendment issues and so on, that we're doing it from an explicit perspective of making sure that those who be directly and intentionally oppressed by institutions would have their right to speak out against them. And so in terms of our funding, it varies by affiliate and chapter. So we've got affiliates in all 50 states. How that, we're all fairly independent, but also connected to the broader national ACLU organization. Our funding is split pretty much 50-50 in terms of national donations half would go to the national org, and then it gets dispersed by need at a chapter level or affiliate level. Our funding in Maryland comes a good chunk comes from that portion. So it's overwhelmingly individual donors. These are folks providing, who are their monthly sustainers of, $10 a month, $50 a month, $1,000 a month, and so on, to also folks who drop their donations, tie their donations to their will and that kind of thing. And we also engage in grant funding, most of which is actually grant applications to the national org as well.
And I've added into the chat a link to the ACLU's most recent annual report, which is all listed or posted on the website that I've also put in the chat. And it lists out our donors for those, so if you have questions about, if your question is speaking to like what motivations might be impacted as a consequence of donations, for instance, like we make sure that we're transparent. We're an organization about transparency, and we make sure that we have that available for everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Did anyone else have any questions for Mr. Sergio Espana?
I had one. He kind of answered it. I was going to ask him about, since we have a lot of organizations all over, would that be centralized? Did they have different divisions that, like, if, for example, Atlanta or Chicago, could they reach out to those if they wanted to network and, if they had issues that they wanted the organization to help them with as far as racism? But you did answer that, so that I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Pretty much every state has their own explicit affiliate, and almost all of them, definitely Maryland, has a consistent intake process. So, in Maryland, for example, outside of just connecting with us, if you're already directly working on policy or organizing efforts, or you're part of a lawsuit, if you feel that there's been a civil rights violation, you can also reach out to our legal intake line that's at the website that Kaylin shared. That's open Tuesdays and Thursdays from 1 to 3 p.m. And you can talk to folks on our legal team to start talking about the potential case that you see there, or what kind of legal support either you or someone in the community needs. Then we'll go from there to see how, if at all, we can respond and support.
So
go ahead. I'm sorry, Caesar.
So I guess what I'm hearing you saying, just so that we're clear, let's say someone had what they deem a civil rights abuse or constitutional abuse by, say, a police officer. They could reach out to the ACLU doing that to see if there's actual merit to the case, and it's something that you guys would be looking to litigate for them. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay.
I would emphasize the first part as being more likely than us being able to take up the case because of ban. So that's why we have that Tuesday and Thursday couple of hours that are available. Is we've been very intentional about having a process where it's about who reaches out and gets processed, rather than like who's got connections where, because that could also be misused. And so we have an intake team that approaches it from a broader angle and from different perspectives across the organization.
Okay.
I had one, sorry, I had one more question. I know you were mentioning you guys as far as working as far as with the police reform or something of that nature. Could you elaborate, especially for Baltimore, how that's going and what that details?
I think that might be the segue.
I see there's one more hand actually. So if we could just hold that question, because that's going to be a lot of what I'm going to talk about. And if that other question is to Sergio, we can deal with that.
Okay.
Is there another question? I know there's a hand raised.
Yes, I have a question real quick, simply because of a report that came out from Florida last year with a protest between Black Lives Matter and I guess it was the Proud Boys. And according to what I read, only like the Black Lives Matter protesters were arrested. And the case pretty much got dismissed only because they had forced the police hand in arresting the Proud Boys. So then they just decided to drop the charges on everybody rather than arrest like the other side. In a situation where we were in a protest or anything like that, would we be able to call on you for assistance if we felt, like you said, like in a situation very similar to that, the police show up and they only, look to charge one side of people protesting or one group of people protesting?
Absolutely. That's unquestionably part of what we're constantly listening for in terms of intake. And we also have a broader network of lawyers more around needing support like in the moment, like at the action, as opposed to after the fact. The National Lawyers Guild, there's a chapter here in Baltimore as well, has folks that are trained in being legal observers that can be present throughout the events and can also reach out to law enforcement and try to mediate if it seems like they're statistically, once again, needlessly escalating.
Okay, fantastic. So if there are no other questions, Mr. Young, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, President Kijana, and thank you to everybody here for having us. Thanks, Sergio, for taking the time to join me today and talk about the organizing work. My name is Kalen Young. I'm the Director of Public Policy at the ACLU of Maryland. And today I'm going to talk really quickly about some of the work that we're doing right now in Annapolis, and then also I think how the UNIA can be a part of some of that work, not only in Annapolis, but also some of the work that we're doing in Baltimore City. As Sergio mentioned, we work a lot in coalitions, and what that looks like is bringing together organizations like this one who are of similar interests and have similar mindset towards how we need to change systems and how those systems interplay and impact people of color, in particular Black people and Brown people. So with that being said, this year, the Maryland Coalition for Justice and Police Accountability, you can go to that website. Sergio, if you could put in the chat, mcjpa.org. That's a website that has been put together that helps give a lot of information about the work that we're doing this year, the police reform asks or demands in the legislature that we're fighting for. It also lists specific legislators that you can focus your attention on, in particular in Baltimore City, because I know this is the city chapter, but also there's toolkits, et cetera, and fact sheets and one-pagers that tell you about some of that legislation. And then there's also a page with a list of all of the 90+ organizations that are signed on as well, that is part of that coalition that are fighting for these reforms. I think the UNIA would be a great addition, by the way, to that list. The 5 reforms that we're looking for right now this year, first and foremost, have to do with SROs. SROs are student resource officers, which we currently have placed in a lot of our schools. Those student resource officers end up actually being really police that impact or that interact in a negative way with our students and create the beginnings of the school to prison pipeline. We would like to remove those individuals from schools and instead take that funding and put it towards things like counselors, put it towards things like college readiness programs, et cetera, to make sure that our students have the resources that they need so that way they can be successful, as opposed to investing, as we know, has been historically done, investing instead in law enforcement as it relates to problems that, you know, growing children have. We don't want those problems to be focused on law enforcement. We would rather that it be focused in other ways. That's the first thing. Second thing, local control of the Baltimore Police Department. As Sergio mentioned, the city has, this Baltimore City is the only city in the state, or the only jurisdiction in the state, and the only city of its size in the entire country that does not control its own police force. And what do I mean by control? I mean that the city council cannot pass ordinances as it pertains to the police department. An example, body-worn cameras. City council wanted to pass a legislation to mandate body-worn cameras back in, I think, 2016, right after Freddie Gray. Guess what? They couldn't because they don't have control. What we have to instead do is go to Annapolis during the small legislative session from January to April and ask the legislature, the full legislature of the whole state, to make these changes. That means that people from Frederick and Allegheny and Cecil and St. Mary's counties have just as much say on your police department as you do, but probably even a little bit more. And so as a consequence of that, we think that we need to change the system to allow for the city council to be the oversight body. And we know that our police department has had a history of corruption. To quote BPD monitor Ken Thompson, the BPD monitor who is overseeing the consent decree implementation in the police department, he said that the police department had a culture of corruption. Previously, Mike Harrison, our police commissioner, said that you cannot reduce crime and see sustained crime reduction with a corrupt police force. You have to first get rid of that corruption before you can see sustained crime reduction. And think about it. Have you ever seen a police department that's corrupt reduce crime? I don't think so. So we need to get local control passed this year. And there's legislation before the Senate and before the House, which is backed by Mayor Scott. And I think the last time I was here, I was still working for then Council President Scott. But same person is now pushing and behind that legislation to get it passed. That's, again, part of the campaign for justice, safety, and justice, safety, and jobs as well. It's one of their primary points. Again, another coalition I think y'all would fit well in. And so we want to get local control because it's about self-determination, Kuji Chakalia, right? Making sure that we can govern ourselves. And that's the main thing on local control. I think it's going to pass and we'll have local control by 2023. The third one that I want to point to you all has to do with use of force. How police officers use force. Right now, under the Constitution, an officer's use of force is measured with regard to whether it's objectively reasonable. In other words, if the officer's force usage is unreasonable from an objective bystander or an objective person in the same situation, then that is when that officer can be subject to penalty or criminal charges. As we know, that has been an insufficient standard to hold officers accountable for excessive force. It's been what we call the constitutional flaw in the Fourth Amendment unreasonable searches and seizures clause. What we're asking for in the Maryland legislature this year is that we increase that standard from the objectively reasonableness standard to the necessary and proportional standard. An officer should only use force that's necessary for the situation and proportionate to the threat. And that force should be used as a last resort when other reasonable measures have been taken. So what does that look like? That looks like instead of an officer pulling out a gun when there's an individual who is unarmed, they would be expected to use less lethal force that's proportional to what's going on, as opposed to just shooting folk. And then, of course, we're asking that they take other reasonable measures first. So that way, for instance, if there's an individual who does have a gun and is shooting people, we're not saying that an officer should not respond accordingly. But what we are saying is where there is less force happening or where there is not such a grave threat, we see constantly that there's less threat to officers, but people are dying. And we want to make sure that we're saving lives. And the consequence of that is going to be, we think that officers will be therefore trained differently, and they will have, and we'll have, be able to hold them with different expectations in their approach to law enforcement. The good thing about this bill is that there's not a lot of opposition, that even the police don't oppose this, but instead they just simply ask that it become a policy. We want it to be a law. It is, however, currently a policy, the new policy under the consent decree in the Baltimore City Police Department. So this is not something that is unreasonable or not already in place here in the state of Maryland. Two more bills that I'm going to talk about. The first one has to do with Npia, the Maryland Public Information Act. It's a bill called Anton's Law. And what this bill does is it asks that police misconduct records are accessible to victims and complainants of police misconduct and brutality. So right now in the Npia, the Maryland Public Information Act, which is akin to on the federal level, the FOIA, federal, what's FOIA stand for?
Freedom of Information.
Freedom of Information Act. Thank you. Thank you. On the state level, it's Npia. There are three buckets in the Npia. There's the must disclose, may disclose, must not disclose. Must disclose means if I'm writing a bill or if I'm a legislator and I'm working on some piece of legislation and you put in an Npia request, we must disclose things dealing with the substance of that work, right? That's transparency. The must not disclose on the far other side is for things that are personnel records. In other words, it's supposed to be things like your social security number if you're a police, if you're an officer or a public official, or your address if you're a public official. Those type of things that we just don't want to go out into the public. It's not necessary for the public. There's no public interest in having an officer's social security number, for instance, right? So that's must not disclose. Currently, police misconduct and records are in the must not disclose category. So even so, if you're a victim, you can't get information on whether an investigation was done appropriately with regard to that misconduct, the only thing you can find out is whether it was sustained or unsustained at this point. What we're asking for is that police misconduct record moves from the must not disclose category to the middle may disclose category. In the may disclose category, a custodian of record, so in Baltimore City, for city agencies, that'll be the city law department, that custodian of record can make a determination based on certain factors in the law with regard to whether you should be able to get that information. And if they deny that, then you have an appeals process. So you can go to circuit court or whatever to try to get that information. And you would have to be, if you are denied, you would be able to get some sort of rationale and reasoning in writing for that. So again, we're asking simply for it to go from the must not disclose to the may disclose. And so that way victims of violence and victims of brutality can have that access. The final bill that I'm going to talk about is the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights that Sergio mentioned earlier. The Law Enforcement Officers, I'm on the phone, sorry. The Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights is a law that was put together back in the 70s that right now provides for special due process rights for law enforcement officers before they can be disciplined. And this goes kind of hand in hand with the Npia that I just talked about. So in other words, many people who may be here are in a union, maybe a government worker, and you know that before you can get fired, there are certain processes that have to be taking place. The police department, however, because of this law, has extra processes that become and have proven to be a hindrance towards getting bad cops off the force and disciplining cops for their bad acts. So what we're asking for, first and foremost, is a complete and full repeal of that. We don't believe that police officers should have any additional or special due process rights that other government officials and government employees don't have. They should not have extra rights, number one. Number two, though, we have to replace it with something that's going to be meaningful, that can make sure that there is trust and that we can hold officers accountable. And why do we have to replace it, though? We have to replace it because if we don't, we'll find that the LEOBR, as we call it, will start popping up in the various collective bargaining agreements in the various jurisdictions. So we don't want a statewide law to be repealed and then we got to have the same fight all across the state in the different jurisdictions. So we're trying to replace it with something that is going to, again, allow for the chief of police to have more say in making sure that that discipline can be taking place. But also we want to balance it with making sure that we do continue to protect the appropriate due process rights for officers because they are public employees as well. So that's my spiel. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, family, does anybody have any questions?
Question
Yeah,
about,
yeah. So I wanted to ask you, well, first, thank you for breaking everything down and making it kind of for Baltimore and what can appeal to us and what our mission is. And I think that one of the biggest questions I have is how can we take the fight kind of to Annapolis to get that control of the police department to be in the hands of Baltimore City, because I think that's the major thing that prevents. I mean, I know of at least 4 people and who have been murdered by police in Baltimore who need some type of a resolution to their problems, and they've been trying to get records. They've been trying to get these, people off the force. So what can we do to help that fight in Annapolis or Baltimore, for that matter, of what we need to do to make that change?
well, let me just start by saying that because of the COVID situation, we are all, as we are doing right now, on these virtual meetings, and legislative session indeed is also virtual. So you can take part in legislative session from your home, from where you're sitting right now, on your computer, on your phone, etc. If you go to mcjpa.org, then you will also be able to see, again, certain legislators that we ask you to target, but also certain, there's toolkits on the resources tab that you can use with regard to using your social media. Hold on a second. Cal, I need you to take that dog downstairs. Take it downstairs. Take it downstairs. Thank you. Sorry about that. You can use that toolkit and you can get some of the information there. What we're asking folks to do right now, though, specifically, is reaching out to legislators on the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee, number 1, and secondly, on the House Judiciary Committee. Those legislators are the ones who are right now doing the work and making the decisions as it pertains to police reform and misconduct. They're the ones hearing the bills right now. We also ask, of course, that you reach out to your city senators and delegates as well. In particular, the president of the state Senate is Bill Ferguson from Baltimore City. Please feel free to start pinging him on a lot of things. One of our champions on this legislation is Senator Joe Carter from West Baltimore. And so any support that you can provide with regard to helping her get the word out, galvanizing messages on social media. I think that we may be organizing in the near future some sort of in-person, socially distant action in Annapolis as well. So staying in touch with us on that would be helpful. But again, check out that website. Also, if you're on Twitter, go to @MD Police Reform, @MD Police Reform. That is the Twitter handle for the coalition. And they're always going to be putting up updates and things like that with regard to when a hearing is coming, how you can get connected, et cetera, updates on what's moving and what amendments might be coming, things like that. Those are some ways that you can get involved. But again, also reach out to Sergio. Sergio put his email in the chat, and Sergio's team is always sending out emails to folk who are interested. We can get y'all signed up as well.
Fantastic. Were there any other questions from the family? Anybody? Nothing? Okay. Fantastic.
Hold on a minute. Could you repeat that Twitter handle again? The @police reform, was it?
MD Police Reform, @MD Police Reform. There it is. Sergio just put it in the chat, @MD Police Reform.
Thank you.
So look, I know there's not a lot more questions. I saw there was a question in the chat about the Capitol riot. That's really mostly national. That's handling a lot of that. Obviously, we are appalled, just like everyone else. But that's the National ACLU is handling that. We're focused mostly on our local and state level stuff. I just want to say before we close our portion that the ACLU is an organization that has changed over the years, as Sergio mentioned. It's been focused, historically on certain issues, like particularly around like abortion rights and things like that. And that's not to say that we aren't continuing on those fronts, but we are also making it more intentional. I think the ACLU is being more intentional about supporting communities that have historically been marginalized by government, so specifically Black and Brown communities. If you go to our website, there's a race equity statement where we talk about dismantling white supremacy and the structures that undergird white supremacy. We also recognize how we benefit as an organization from some white supremacist structures as well. And so we work internally, not just in our work externally, but also internally as an organization to make sure that we're uplifting race equity, make sure that we're uplifting historically marginalized voices. And we're focusing our energy next on pushing government in that direction as well, make sure that government is involving race equity in its decision making. And so I think that the UNIA is prime position to be supportive in that work, and we want to support you all in your work as well. And we thank you, me and Sergio, speaking for Sergio, we thank you all for taking the time to listen to us and bringing us to your meeting today.
Hey, Brother Kalen, I just have one quick question. You might have answered it, but I just wanted to make sure. What can we do, not just as the UNIA, but just as individual citizens to just put the word out about the bills and everything? Is there anything that you recommend to promote that?
Yeah, I'm gonna turn it over to Sergio to chime in, because Sergio is really about the engagement and moving and pushing people. But you know, your social media, your talking to people, all of those types of things is going to be, again, very easy ways that you can help get the word out and continue to build that push, and then calling your legislators as well.
So I linked in the chat in the coalition website that Keelan mentioned to a resources page that has one-pagers on each of the bills that we're taking up. Then there's a lot more comprehensive, and apologies if this is maybe too many hyperlinks, but just one more, I swear. This is a much more comprehensive toolkit that has those one sheets, but also has social media templates, email templates, written testimony templates, so that folks can make it their own, along with direct links to find your legislators and get it going. Because of COVID, there are limitations to how we're showing up compared to years past, out of respect for everyone's safety. But at the same time too, these are fights for everyone's safety. We have to do everything that we can. So as Keelan mentioned, we're in the process of discussing the very likely need to escalate our approach as legislators continue to hide behind the GOP while they have a supermajority and can get these bills through. So I really encourage y'all to engage in the digital actions that are in that toolkit. Again, on the flip side, there's limitations to COVID, but on the flip side, everyone's presence is virtual right now, and they are extremely sensitive to how the virtual conversation on them is going. Calling, like if y'all are members, say like in District 46, where Lou Clippinger, or who's the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, or Bill Ferguson, or know folks from there, like having direct appeals on social media, tagging them, quick 30-second videos, saying, can't believe that this is what my legislator is doing. It has an impact. They're aware of just how much that is the only space that's accessible for them to clear up or be held accountable for their actions.
Fantastic. Okay, well, once again, I want to thank both of you for coming and sharing, your mission and the current events of what you guys are focused on this year. I should say that what I'm going to be doing, what we're going to be doing, is one of our first actions at our next members meeting is we're going to look to recruit at least 2 members to be liaison representatives to the ACLU. And those 2 people, once they are, are appointed, will be the point person, and they'll be reaching out to you, Sergio, as well, immediately. But that will be at our next members meeting in about a week or so. So look to hear from us in about a week and a half, and we'll move forward. And once again, thank you very much for all that you're doing to help uplift the race and the people, and to create equity and a level playing field in these great states.
Thank y'all for the invitation and for all that y'all been doing for as long as we've been, and without any need to, swivel and this, that, or the other, but stay consistently focused on on how we're going to get towards actual empowerment. So yeah, I appreciate y'all making the time and reaching out to invite us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you again. Okay, family. So that with that said, we now have and we've hit our 1 hour mark. We try to keep the meeting to an hour, but we do have a member share. So if anybody wants to share anything prior to adjournment, please feel free to do so at this time.
I wanted to ask a question because I unfortunately missed the last meeting. I believe it was the Monday meeting. So I missed the elections, if there was any elections or, you know, new roles in the group.
I nominate Frank Shaw for chaplain.
Hey, is that the only open position right now?
No, I don't think so. Let's I'm gonna get with President Kajana to make the to see what's open.
Yeah, why don't you make the next meeting, the Monday meeting?
I think my question is like, can we get are we going to get updates of meeting, maybe like an email meeting notes or something like that? So people, if we can't always make the meeting, we can have updates, you know, because
I try to record them, but I forgot the
stuff,
last one. I try to record them. I thought to cut you off. I might have recorded. I got to double check. Let me double check. But sometimes I forget. Okay. So I need y'all to stay on me too. This one's recorded so I can share the chat as well and all of that. But sometimes I forget. So next time we do it, just remind me to hit that record. And I'm going to check. And I might have recorded it. So yeah, but definitely we need to start the recording and making sure it gets out. And if you text the text line meeting, it'll usually update to the last meeting. Give it a couple of days. Like if we end the day by Monday, you can text the word meeting and it'll give you an update video of our last meeting. But I'll double check because sometimes, man, I got to do better. I forget to hit the record button.
No, I think what I'm saying is just if, you know, we get small, you know, like a check bullet list of updates to our emails after meetings. That way, if someone can't make it, they can still stay on top and we'll know, okay, we got a plan for the Juneteenth event and we're going to have a call on this day, you know, just kind of ongoing updates so everybody can stay engaged. You know, because like today was a great meeting and I think ACLU gives us kind of a good push, something to push for and start working on, because they are doing some good stuff from legislative point of view. But I think as a coalition, we can push for what we want the most and they will get back behind that. And police reform, I think, is #1. That's the closest thing to the ground that we need to be working on, right? I think, you know, that's going to change a lot of people's lives. And being that it's legislative, it's going to take some time. So we got to really give some people might not know that they're fighting on our behalf and we need to get the word out.
Absolutely.
Well, race first, everyone. If you guys want to send me the notes that you took today and from last week until Brother Everett.
Michonne, you there?
I think she froze up.
Lady President froze. Okay, she'll hop back in.
Yeah,
but on the 19th, Brother Frank, I'm sorry, Michelle, hold tight. On the 19th, I was kind of, I'm trying to get everybody together, but I was waiting on you. That's when I had text you. So we haven't really, you know, we're still in the works. So I'm gonna get with everybody, Sister Charlene, yourself, the Lady President, the President, and whoever would like to be involved, so we can make this. I want to make sure it's tight. So it's all discussion right now. We're ready to plan, but I just want to make sure everybody's involved, because everything we want to do, we want to make it tight. You know, we want to have major participation and you know, for the president's instruction, let's do everything at top notch. So we want to just keep that up. But I got you covered.
Okay, if you guys send me all of your notes from the past 2 meetings, what I'll do this week, I'll go ahead and send you an update. But until the secretary or the corresponding secretary gets everything in place, I'll do that. And I'll do the agendas, or, you know, send out the templates, whatever.
Lady President, you froze, but I got you covered. I'll send you the notes by Monday, if you can hear me. Go ahead, Brother Anthony. You know you're supposed to be DJing, so we gotta have your stuff ready for that 19th.
It's all good. On that tip, on the 27th, which is gonna be, what's that, next Saturday? I will be providing musical entertainment for Giving Love. It's called Giving Love, 2 to 5 on Baker Street. It's a bunch of community organizations that came together to give out clothing, feed the homeless, and so forth and so on. I'm affiliated with one of those organizations also called the Food Warriors. You know what I'm saying? So I'll be out there. Where I have the flyer. Where could I possibly post it so everyone could get to it?
If you send me an email, I can get it out to everybody, and I'll put it on our social media and everything.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you. I appreciate it. Race
Not
first.
a problem at all. Race first.
Race first. All right, family. If there's nothing else, we can move to adjournment. And that's on you, Brother Anthony.
Say again?
I said the adjournment is done by the Sergeant at Arms, which will be part of like closing words basically for the meeting.
Oh, oh my God! Closing words. Seriously, I mean, let's just do it, man. That's all I gotta say. Let's just get together, do what we gotta do to, you know what I mean, to push our agenda. When I say our agenda, I mean the family agenda forward. You know what I mean? Whatever we gotta do. You know what I mean? Like Malcolm had said, by any means necessary. You know what I'm saying? You know, that's about it. Peace and blessings to everyone. Race first.
Race first.
Race
Hey,
first.
hey, Brother President. I didn't know if we have, for those that don't know, we got the president of Atlanta, 421. I don't know if he wants to speak.
Yes, I
He's
apologize.
real solid. I see
I
him
did.
popping up quiet, but if he wanted to say something, feel free. But if not, you can close.
No, absolutely. We do need to first of all, thank you, Brother Ross, for coming to the meeting. And if you'd like to say a few words, please do so at this time to the Baltimore family up here.
I don't see a mic, so he might just be on visual. So maybe he's from a phone or something.
I don't know. I'm not sure. Brother Ross, are you there?
Yeah.
Did y'all want me to say something?
If you like, Mr. Lady President, by all means.
No, I was just saying thank you guys for joining the call, and I'll make sure that I get the agenda out for the Monday call, and whatever the agenda items you guys have, please send them in as soon as you can, and that way, if we're having a meeting Monday, then I can make sure you get it at least tomorrow. That way you have time to review it.
Fantastic. Okay, so it looks like Brother Ross is not able to communicate at this time. So with that said, family, race first, and thank you all again.
Race first.
Race first.
Peace and blessings.
Race first, peace and blessings. That's all right.